The Mojave Desert doesn't care about your rank. It doesn't care about your record, your medals, or the 3 tours you survived before breakfast. At 0600, Fort Ridgeline's training yard was already pushing 94 degrees, the kind of dry heat that cracked lips and cooked patience before a single word was spoken. 12 men stood in formation, not recruits, not rookies, but operators, selected from the top 2% of naval candidates. Men who had bled through Hell Week, earned their spots in classified field operations, and carried the quiet, dangerous confidence of people who had already proven themselves where it counted. They were waiting for their new instructor. What walked out of the shadow of Building 7 was not what any of them expected. Maya Reeves moved across the yard without hurry, without announcement, without the performative authority that most instructors used to establish dominance on day 1. She was in her early 20s, athletic-build skin, the warm brown of someone who had spent years under open skies rather than fluorescent lights, dark hair loose and natural around her shoulders. She wore a white crop top that showed the defined lines of her core desert, AOR, 1 camo trousers, coyote brown combat boots, and a tactical belt cinched at her waist. Beside her, matching her pace, stride for stride, was a Belgian Malinois with black and grey fur and amber eyes that moved across the formation with the calm, systematic focus of a security camera that had learned to think. Cole Harmon, standing at the front of the formation, let the silence stretch exactly 3 seconds before he broke it. "Ma'am." He said the word, the way some people spit out something that tasted wrong. "With all due respect, and I do mean all of it, are you actually supposed to be teaching us?" Quiet laughter moved through the formation like a small wave. These were men who had collectively survived things that never made it into official reports, and they were being asked to take direction from someone who looked like she might card at a bar. Maya didn't look at Cole. Not yet. She walked to the front of the formation and stopped. She did not look at a clipboard. She did not look at notes. She looked at each man in turn, not a sweep, not a performance, but the kind of specific attention that made people feel catalogued without understanding how. Then she spoke. One man at a time, quietly enough that only the man she addressed could hear. She said something to Cole Harmon that drained the color from his face for 3 seconds before he locked it back down. She said something to Dante Cruz that made his jaw move, once before going still. She said something to Jake Mercer that caused him to look at the ground. She said something to Ethan Wade that he did not react to at all, which to anyone watching carefully was its own kind of reaction. No one else heard what was said. No record was made. Whatever she knew, she kept contained between herself and each man the way things that matter are kept. The yard went silent. Not the polite silence of people being respectful, the sharp, airless silence of people who have just had a locked door opened without their permission. Troy Banks, 6'4" and 240 pounds of structured muscle, stopped breathing for a moment. Ryan Holt looked at his line and then at the ground. Maya capped the marker and turned around. Her eyes moved to Cole's for the first time. They were steady and dark and gave away nothing. "Do you have a question, Trainee Harmon?" she said. Her voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of quiet that made perceptive people nervous. Cole was not perceptive yet. "Yeah." He stepped forward, closing the distance to 5 feet. "What gives you the right to go through our files like that?" "I read files," she said. "It's what I do." She glanced at Ghost, who had been sitting perfectly still beside her left leg since the moment they entered the yard. In the same moment, Cole registered the look. Ghost stood and walked unhurried entirely, without aggression, directly to Cole, and sat in front of him. The dog did not growl, did not bare teeth, did not perform threat. He simply looked up at Cole with those amber eyes and held the gaze with a patience that had no bottom. Dante Cruz said it quietly, almost to himself. "That dog is reading him faster than she is." Maya turned back to the formation. "You look at me and you calculate weakness. You see small young female and your brain, every single one of yours, immediately runs that math and decides you already know what I am. She took one step forward. You're wrong. Cole laughed. It sounded hollow even to him. So what, you're going to lecture us into shape? No. She gestured toward the training mat. I'm going to give every one of you a chance to prove I don't belong here. All of you, at once. The formation exchanged glances. 12 against 1. It should have been over in seconds. It was over in 6 minutes, but not the way they planned. What none of them noticed, not until much later, was that Ghost never once left his position in the corner of the yard. He simply watched. And every single time a man approached Maya from her blind side, Ghost shifted his weight, barely a movement, almost nothing in the direction of the incoming threat. A signal, a warning, a language between two people that the other 12 didn't yet know existed. Cole Harmon did not sleep. He lay on his bunk in the dark with his forearm across his eyes and replayed the fight in his head like a film he could rewind but not change. 6 minutes. He had fought in actual combat, had taken fire in 3 countries, had run towards sounds that made other men freeze, and a 130-pound woman with a dog had put all 12 of them on their backs before the sweat dried. His right arm still ached, where she had hit the nerve cluster at his shoulder. He told himself it was the technique, not the person. He told himself they hadn't been ready, hadn't been serious, hadn't been trying. He knew he was lying. Dante Cruz watched him from across the room, said nothing for a long time, and then said, "You wouldn't be this angry if she was a man." Cole didn't answer. He grabbed his notebook and his pen and started writing movement patterns, timing the angles she had used to redirect force. He wrote for 2 hours. He found nothing he could exploit. He went to sleep angry and woke up the same way. At 0500, before the rest of the unit was up, Cole was already in the yard. He had a plan. A reasonable plan built on analysis and legitimate tactical thinking, or so he told himself. What he actually had was pride that had been publicly injured, looking for a structure to stand behind. Maya was already there. She was standing at the center of the mat, eyes forward. Ghost seated at her left side, both of them looking like they had been there for hours. "Rematch," Cole said. "1-on-1. No dog, no tricks." Maya looked at him for a moment. Then, without expression, she almost smiled. Not warm, not friendly, something cooler and more considered. "Okay," she said. He moved first. He was faster than yesterday, more deliberate, the hours of analysis in his hands and his feet. It didn't matter. She was inside his guard before he registered the movement, her palm connecting with his solar plexus, with exactly enough force to empty his lungs without damaging anything. And then his legs were gone, and the mat was against his back, and the Nevada sky was above him, pale and indifferent. He lay there for a moment. She crouched beside him, not standing over him, not performing victory, and sat at his eye level the way you sit next to someone you're actually talking to. "I read the Kandahar report," she said. Her voice was completely level. Not gentle, not clinical, somewhere between the two. All of it. Including the parts that didn't make the official summary. Cole said nothing. His jaw was tight. "You didn't run because you were a coward," she said. "You ran because your nervous system made a decision in 400 milliseconds that your conscious mind had no vote in. That's not a character failure. That's a physiological event under extreme stress." He looked at her. "That's the same thing." "It isn't," she said. Simply, cowardice is a choice you make after you've had time to think. What happened to you was a reflex. The difference matters, because a reflex can be retrained. A coward can't be reasoned with. She stood. "That's why you're here. Not to prove you're already good enough. To become something your nervous system hasn't learned to be yet." She walked back toward the building Ghost beside her. Cole stayed on the mat for another minute, staring up at the sky, feeling something he couldn't immediately name. Not defeat exactly. Something older and more uncomfortable than defeat. That night, long after lights out, he heard something at the base of his bunk. He looked down. Ghost was there, and Maya was in the doorway behind him, one shoulder against the frame, watching. She said nothing. She had simply opened the door, and Ghost had walked in on his own after that, which apparently was a thing she had allowed. Cole looked at the dog for a long moment. Ghost didn't move. Maya said from the doorway, "He does this sometimes. When he's made a decision about someone." She didn't explain what kind of decision. She pushed off the frame and was gone. Dante Cruz, awake in the opposite bunk, watched the whole thing and said nothing. He would think about it later, about what it meant that the dog had walked through that particular door, about what Ghost had seen in Cole Harmon that Cole hadn't yet seen in himself. On the first real morning of training, Maya didn't touch a weapon, a mat, or a tactical diagram. She stood at the front of the room with a single sentence written on the board behind her. The body fails. The mind decides what happens next. Combat psychology, she said, is not a soft skill. It is the skill. Everything else, your marksmanship, your hand-to-hand, your fieldcraft, every one of those things degrades under stress, unless you understand what stress is actually doing to your brain while it's doing it. She walked them through the neuroscience without condescension. The amygdala hijack, the tunnel vision that comes with adrenaline, the way the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for complex decision-making, goes partially offline in the first seconds of a threat response. Shane Kowalski, who had 2 deployments in Afghanistan and a Bronze Star, raised his hand. "So you're saying we can't trust our own instincts?" "I'm saying your instincts were calibrated for a world that no longer exists," Maya said. "They're running software that was written for the savannah. We're going to update the software." On the second day, she introduced what she called the mirror exercise. Each person stood in front of the group and spoke about the worst professional failure of their career. No omissions, no framing, the thing they had buried deepest. The room went rigid. Troy Banks looked at the ceiling. Jake Mercer found something to study on the floor. Cole Harmon stood up before anyone else moved. He told them about Kandahar. He told them what actually happened, not the version in the report, not the version he had constructed over 2 years of private revision, but the real sequence of events, the sound, the air made when the firefight started, the way his legs moved before his brain gave the order. When he finished, the room was quiet. Maya didn't applaud, didn't offer comfort. She said, "Now you're ready to learn," and moved on, and somehow that was exactly right. On the third day, she brought Ghost into the exercise. She set a target object at the far end of the yard and told each trainee that their objective was simple: reach it. Ghost sat between them and the target, ears forward, watching. One by one they tried. Ghost didn't attack, didn't bark, didn't escalate. He simply moved, reading the angle of each approach, the lean of each body, the micro-shift of weight that preceded a direction change, and repositioned himself to deny the path before the attempt was even fully committed. Shane tried 3 times and came closest, using misdirection, drawing Ghost left before breaking right. Ghost had already adjusted. Ethan Wade walked to the edge of the yard, looked at the target, and sat down cross-legged on the ground. He held out his hand, palm up, and waited. Ghost looked at him for 10 seconds, then walked over and pressed his nose into Ethan's palm. Maya, watching from the shade of the building's overhang, allowed herself a real smile for the first time since they had arrived. It was brief and unguarded, and gone before most of the group could register it. But Cole saw it. And it changed slightly the architecture of what he thought he understood about the woman standing in front of them. It happened on the 4th evening after 2100, during a field navigation exercise 2 miles outside the perimeter. The desert at night was a different country. The temperature had dropped 30 degrees. The darkness was dense and directionless, and the 12 trainees were spread across a quarter-mile radius, working through a low communication drill that Maya had designed to force individual decision-making under disorientation. Ghost noticed first. He didn't bark. He stopped walking, oriented himself toward a specific bearing northeast of their position, and sat. Just sat. Cole was close enough to watch, and didn't understand. Maya, 3 feet away, understood immediately. She brought her hand down once, a flat cutting gesture, and the trainees within sight range went still. Ghost's signal was one she and her previous handler had built over 8 years. Sit and hold meant threat that cannot yet be seen, multiple sources. Armed approach suppressed. She had 4 seconds to make a decision. She made it without hesitation. Wade. Cruise. Get them back to the perimeter. All of them. Move. Ethan was already moving before she finished the sentence. He had been watching Ghost for 3 days. Dante Cruz grabbed the nearest trainee by the arm and started pushing. Cole didn't move. What's happening, Harmon? Go. Her voice was flat and absolute. Get them out. I'm not leaving you out here. That is a direct order. The first muzzle flash came from the northeast, exactly where Ghost had been facing. What followed was not chaos. It was something worse than chaos, which was professional violence, executed by people who knew exactly what they were doing. 3 operators in unmarked tactical gear moved out of the desert dark with a coordination that spoke of rehearsal. Maya was already engaging the first before he had fully committed to his approach, using the terrain, using the dark, using the half-second of adjustment time that every attacker needs when their target doesn't behave as expected. She took down the first with a throat strike and a knee. The second she redirected into a rock formation. But the third was patient. He waited while his partners occupied her attention, and when her weight was committed forward, he moved not for her arms, not for her torso. He brought the baton down across her left knee with the flat mechanical precision of someone who had done this before. The sound was wrong. Her leg buckled. She stayed up. He hit the right knee. Same angle, same force. Her legs gave entirely. She went to both knees in the dirt and kept her hands up and kept her eyes open and did not make a sound. Through the field door of the navigation shelter 50 yards away, Cole Harmon watched this happen. He had both fists pressed against the metal frame, and he was saying her name, and the words coming out of his mouth weren't organized into anything coherent, just her name. Just the word, over and over. Ghost was still in the dark, 40 feet from the cluster of operators. When the third one reached down to secure Maya's wrists, something happened that had nothing to do with training. The sound Ghost made did not come from the trained discipline of 8 years of military service. It came from somewhere older and more permanent than any conditioning. He crossed the distance in 2 seconds and hit the first operator at full speed, all 65 pounds, moving like a vehicle. He drove the man into the ground and held him there, jaws locked at the collar and shoulder pinion without effort. The second operator raised his weapon. Ghost left the first man and was on him before the muzzle cleared horizontal. Same technique, same result. Down and dead. The third tried to reach Maya, where she was on the ground. Ghost covered the space between them in a single movement and brought him down from behind, standing over him with his full weight until the man stopped moving. Through the observation window, 12 elite operators stood in silence and watched a dog, a creature trained for 8 years to be controlled and precise and measured, become something else entirely. Something that had given up all of those things because the alternative was unacceptable. Maya's voice cut through the dark, raw and thin, but completely steady. Ghost, heel. The dog stopped, stood over the third man with blood on his muzzle and his chest heaving, and his eyes wide and wild and confused, like something that had surfaced from deep water and didn't recognize where it was. Ghost. Her voice again. Good boy. It's done. Heel. He walked to her, sat beside her in the dirt, put his head against her arm, and then her eyes closed and she went down sideways and the Nevada desert was very quiet. The medevac took 6 minutes. In those 6 minutes, Ethan Wade ran the stabilization with a field kit and a level of focus that nobody had seen from the quiet man from Montana, calling out instructions in a voice that left no room for argument, keeping her vitals documented, keeping her airway clear, keeping the fractures immobilized with what the kit provided. The lead medic who arrived said, "Good work, son. You may have saved her life." Ethan said, "She saved ours," and returned the kit without another word. Both of Maya's legs were broken. The right was worse than the left. Compound fractures in both possible internal bleeding from the impact, the kind of injury that has a long and complicated conversation with the word recovery before it gets anywhere near the word normal. Cole didn't go back to the barracks. He sat in the hallway of the base medical facility for 6 hours, in a plastic chair under fluorescent light, with dried blood on his knuckles from when he had hit the door frame during the attack. He didn't wash it off. A nurse told him 4 times that there were no visitors outside of immediate family. He said each time that she had no immediate family. The nurse said that didn't change the policy. Cole said each time I understand, and did not move. Dante Cruz appeared eventually with 2 cups of cafeteria coffee, handed one to Cole without speaking and sat down. They were quiet for 3 minutes before Dante said, "Ethan got arrested." Cole's head came up. "What tried to break into the kennel?" Said he was going to get Ghost out before they processed the euthanasia order. "They're going to put him down. There's a hearing tomorrow morning. Destruction of military property, excessive force, failure to respond to commands." Dante looked at his coffee. "The protocol exists for a reason. Dogs that kill people don't get a pass on circumstance." "He saved her life," Cole said. "I know. He saved all of us." "I know that too," Dante said quietly. "Doesn't always change the outcome." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then, "What time is the hearing?" The hearing was at 0800. All 12 of them were there. Jake Mercer had pulled the security footage from the mobile units they had carried during the navigation exercise. The footage showed Ghost stopping a full stop, weight back, no forward movement, when one of the operators raised a hand. The man was down, weaponless arm up, in a gesture that any reasonable observer would classify as surrender. Ghost had assessed the gesture, recalculated threat level, and redirected. He had not re-engaged that operator. He had moved to the one still actively reaching for Maya. Ethan presented this to the hearing officer with the calm precision of someone who had spent a night preparing for a conversation he was not willing to lose. "This dog did not malfunction," he said. "He made a tactical decision under fire that most trained operators wouldn't have made." He distinguished between a surrendered combatant and an active threat. "That's not a failure of control. That's control at a level most of us haven't reached." The hearing officer watched the footage 3 times. Ghost was placed under a 30-day behavioral review pending full investigation. The hearing officer ruled the initial euthanasia order suspended. The final determination, honorable retirement, came 18 days later, after the investigation into the attack was closed, and the footage had been reviewed by 3 separate panels. When Cole told the unit, Ryan Holt sat down on his bunk and put his face in his hands and didn't say anything for a long time. Nobody asked why. Not yet. On the 4th day after the attack, a man in a dark suit appeared in the hospital corridor at 1400. He sat down in the chair next to Cole without asking, which told Cole something immediately. People who sit down next to strangers without asking are either reckless or confident, and this man was neither reckless nor the kind of person who had ever been anything other than exactly what he meant to be. "Trainee Harmon," the man said. "My name is Director Callum. I need 20 minutes of your time, and a room without windows. The room he took Cole to had soundproofed walls and a single table with 2 chairs. The kind of room where things were said that never made it into official language. "What I'm going to tell you," Callum said, "is classified at a level above anything you currently hold clearance for. You repeat any of it, you spend the next 20 years explaining yourself to people you don't want to explain yourself to." Understood. Maya Reeves is her 4th identity in 6 years. Cole kept his face still. Before that, she was someone else. Before that, someone else again. The original name is classified above my clearance. Callum opened an encrypted tablet. The photo on it showed Maya younger, harder, standing in tactical gear beside faces that had been redacted. She was recruited at 16. The program's legal framework was, at the time, a classified instrument that operated outside standard recruitment law, a structure that no longer exists, and that has since been the subject of a sealed internal review. Callum said this without apology and without elaboration, in the tone of someone acknowledging a fact that has already been judged and filed. He continued, "Tested off every chart they had for spatial awareness, threat assessment, and psychological profiling. She was put into a program called Integrated Operator, one of 4 people ever trained under the combined methodology, CQC and combat psychology together. The theory was that the most effective operator in complex human environments wasn't a shooter or a negotiator. It was someone who could be both simultaneously and decide in real time which the situation required. What happened to the other 3? 2 are dead. 1 is retired and untraceable." Callum paused. Maya completed 22 missions in 6 years. Most of them didn't result in casualties on either side. She didn't go into hostile environments to eliminate. She went in to pull people back from the edge before they crossed it. She saved lives that the official record will never be able to count because the official record can't admit those lives were ever at risk. Cole was quiet for a moment. "Then why does someone want her dead?" "Because she's proof that the methodology works. There is a faction, it exists across governments, not just ours, that profits from escalation, from conflict, from the continuation of cycles that her approach can interrupt." Callum's voice stayed flat. "She is not dangerous because of what she's done. She is dangerous because of what she demonstrates is possible. 2 years ago, someone inside her organization sold her identity to the networks she had been working against. She had 48 hours to disappear. We gave her Fort Ridgeline, a cover assignment, 12 trainees to teach." Cole thought about the first morning in the yard, the whiteboard, the things she had written. She knew who we were before she ever walked out there. "She always knows who she's walking into," Callum said. "That's the job." He folded the tablet closed. The 3 operatives at the attack were the opening move. Whoever sent them knows she survived. They'll send more. Better prepared, better armed. And there is someone at Fort Ridgeline, on the base right now, feeding them information. Cole looked at him. "You want us to find them?" "I want you to watch," Callum said. "You have access, she doesn't. You move through that base as trainees. Nobody tracks a trainee the way they track an investigator." He stood. "And I want you to understand what she risked to stand in front of 12 men who, on day 1, couldn't see past what she looked like." He left without shaking Cole's hand. Cole sat alone in the soundproofed room for a long time. He thought about the first morning, about what he had said when he saw her, about every assumption his brain had run in the first 3 seconds of looking at her. He felt the weight of those assumptions in a way that was specific and physical, like something pressing down on his sternum from the inside. They split the watches the next morning. Different routes, different observation points, different shifts at the medical facility. Jake Mercer found Vickers first, a base maintenance worker, mid-40s, unremarkable, who appeared outside the ICU twice a day and stood in the corridor for exactly 5 minutes without touching any of the equipment he was nominally there to service. He had transferred to Fort Ridgeline 3 months ago, exactly when Maya had been assigned. Cole watched Vickers from behind a newspaper for 2 mornings, confirmed the pattern, and passed the information to Callum. Callum's response came back in 6 hours. Vickers was a distraction, deliberately placed, carefully maintained. His job was to absorb attention, to give the unit something to find so they would stop looking. Vickers had no access to operational schedules. He was a decoy designed to be discovered, a door that opened onto a wall. The actual source was inside their unit, someone with access to Maya's training calendar, someone who could confirm exact timing when Vickers could only confirm presence. Cole sat with that for a long time before he understood what Ghost had already known. In the past week, Ghost had walked past the door of every trainee's room during the late evening rounds that Maya had established as part of the exercise regimen. Every door, every night. Cole had watched without understanding what he was watching as Ghost paused longer at Ryan Holt's door than at any other. Not aggressive, just present, waiting. On the 5th evening of the watch rotation, Cole was walking the corridor when he noticed Ghost sitting outside Ryan's door. Maya was a few feet back, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, watching the dog. "He's been there for 10 minutes, she said. Her voice was quiet. "Won't come when I call him back. That's happened twice before in my career." She looked at Cole. Both times, the person behind the door needed someone. Cole almost walked past. Ghost didn't move. He stood there looking at Cole with the particular patience of something that had decided to wait as long as necessary, which was the patience of something that did not experience waiting the way humans did. Cole opened the door. Ryan was sitting on the edge of his bunk, phone in both hands, the screen showing a photo. A young woman outside a college building. San Diego light, unaware of the camera. His face looked like something that had been under pressure for too long. Ghost walked in and sat down beside Ryan. He didn't growl, didn't perform any threat behavior. He simply put his head on Ryan's knee and stayed there. Ryan looked at the dog. Then he put his face in his hands and began to talk. His sister was 19. She was a sophomore at San Diego State. 3 weeks before the attack, Ryan had received a package photographs taken from distance outside her dormitory with her class schedule printed on the back. The message that accompanied it had no text. It didn't need any. He had been providing Maya's location in the exercise schedule. Never tactical information, never details about her security protocols, only the specific times when she was outside the perimeter with no overhead coverage. He had tried to distort the information, had delayed, had changed minor details. The week of the attack, they had told him, the next package about his sister would contain something other than photographs if he didn't give them exact times. He gave them exact times. He had not slept properly since. Cole listened to all of it without speaking. Ghost remained on Ryan's knee throughout. When Ryan finished, the room was quiet for a moment, and then Cole said, "Callum is going to need all of that. Tonight." Ryan nodded. He already knew. Ghost lifted his head from Ryan's knee, looked at him once, and then looked at Cole. Neither of them said anything. Sometimes the moment doesn't need language. It was 2300 when Ryan knocked on the door of the modified base housing room that had been assigned to Maya following her transfer out of the medical facility. Cole was in the hallway. Maya had asked to see Ryan alone. Ghost was already inside. The room was small and lit, with a single lamp that produced more warmth than light. Maya sat in her wheelchair near the window. The window showed nothing but dark desert and a distant fence line, but she was looking at it anyway, the way people look at things that aren't the thing they're actually seeing. Ghost was in the corner awake, his amber eyes moving from the door to Maya, and back with the rhythmic attention of someone keeping watch. When Ryan stepped in, Ghost's gaze held on him for 10 full seconds. No growl, no posture change, just a long considered look, and then Ghost placed his chin back down on his paws. The assessment had been made. Maya didn't speak first. She let the silence exist in the room, let Ryan feel the full weight of being in it, and watched his hands where they hung at his sides and the way he couldn't find a place to put his eyes. "Look at me," she said finally. Her voice was even. Ryan looked up. His eyes were red at the edges. He had been carrying this for 3 weeks, and it showed in his body the way long-term weight always shows, not just in the face, but in the shoulders, in the specific way the spine holds itself when the thing it's supporting is too heavy. "Who did they threaten?" she asked. "My sister. She's 19, San Diego State." He described the photographs, the schedule on the back, the implication that didn't require words. Maya listened without expression. "When he finished," she said, "how long did you hold out?" 3 weeks. You altered the information. I tried. The first 2 times. He paused. The 3rd time they told me the next thing they sent would be different from photographs. I gave them accurate timing. Maya was quiet. Ghost stood up from his corner and walked across the room and sat down between them, not beside either one, but equidistant, as if he had decided that this particular conversation required a presence in the middle. Ryan looked at the dog. Ghost looked back, with the steady, undemanding attention that had been his particular quality from the beginning. "I've lost people because of informants," Maya said. Not bitterly, just as information. "I've had to change who I am 4 times, because someone decided the money or the threat or the ideology was worth more than the life at the other end of the information. Every time it happened, I built another wall." She looked at her hands in her lap. "By the time I came to Fort Ridgeline, I had built enough walls that Ghost was the only one I let inside all of them." Ghost turned and briefly pressed his nose against her wrist. She didn't react visibly, but her hands relaxed. "The question I need you to answer, not for the tribunal, for me, is simple. If your sister was safe, would you have done it?" The room held the question. Ryan didn't answer immediately, which was the right response. The wrong answer would have come fast, wrapped in desperation. The true answer needed a moment to locate itself. "No," he said. "Never." Ghost turned and looked at Maya. The look was long and direct, and entirely clear in the way that Ghost's communications had always been clear to her. She understood it. She had learned his language the same way you learn any language that matters slowly, imperfectly, and then all at once. "Callum's team moved on your sister the night you told Cole," Maya said. "She has been under protection since then. She is safe." Ryan's breath left him in a way that wasn't controlled. Ghost placed his head on Ryan's knee and stayed there still and warm, the way he had in the barracks room. Ryan put one hand on the dog's head and didn't speak for a moment. "Tomorrow, I'll speak at your tribunal," Maya said. "Not because the outcome is simple, or because what you did didn't cost anyone anything. It did. It cost me." She held his gaze. "But the way we treat people who break under pressure is a choice. And that choice says more about who we are than anything we've done in the field." Ryan nodded. He stood to leave, made it to the door, and stopped. "Ma'am." The night Ghost sat with me in my room. Before I said anything, he looked at the dog. He didn't look at me like I was a threat. He looked at me like I still had a chance. Maya looked at Ghost. Ghost did not look back. His tail moved once quiet and unhurried, a small motion in the low light of the room. "He usually knows first," she said. "Commander Aldrich gave them 2 weeks. Maya was given the option to complete the training program in a modified capacity theory, strategy, psychological instruction, with the trainees handling physical demonstration. She said no on the first day, no on the third, and nothing at all on the fifth, which Cole chose to interpret as progress. He showed up every morning during approved visiting hours with a single question about a technique from the previous week's training. He asked carefully, specifically in the way that made it difficult to answer with anything other than an actual answer. On the second day, Ethan Wade came with a question about psychological disorientation tactics. On the third, Jake Mercer asked about reading micro-expressions under stress. Maya told Jake she wasn't his instructor anymore. Jake pulled up a chair and sat down and waited. 11 minutes passed. Maya answered the question. By the 8th day, she stopped telling them to leave. She began giving assignments, small ones at first, specific techniques to practice and report back, on scenarios to work through and return with questions. The training moved into her room, and then into the courtyard, and then into a modified arrangement in the base facility where she could observe and they could execute. The crisis came in the 8th week during a close-quarters disarm sequence. Troy Banks couldn't find the mechanic in the verbal description. He was a kinesthetic learner, had always needed to see and feel the geometry of a technique before his body could replicate it, and no amount of precise language was giving him the angle. He said so quietly and without aggression, and then his eyes got red, and he looked at the ceiling, and his jaw worked for a moment, before he said, "I can't learn this way, ma'am. I need to see it. I always have. That's not on you, it's on me, but I don't know how to fix it." The room was quiet. Maya looked at Troy, 240 pounds of trained operator sitting there with his hands on his knees and his eyes wet. And for the first time, in the entire program, she had no immediate answer. Ghost had been lying in the corner. He stood up. He walked to the practice table at the edge of the room, stepped up onto it with the fluid economy of a much smaller animal, and lay down. Then, with a specificity that nobody in the room could have anticipated, he shifted his weight, bringing his hips around, rolling his shoulder through in a movement that corresponded precisely to the weight transfer at the core of the technique Maya had been describing for 20 minutes. Troy stared at him. He stood up, walked to the mat, and replicated the movement on the first attempt. Dante Cruz wrote in his journal that night, "A dog taught 12 special operations trainees, something a decorated instructor couldn't put into words. I don't know what to do with that except write it down." Maya said nothing for a long moment after Troy landed the technique. Then she looked at Ghost, still on the table watching her with his amber eyes. "Show off," she said quietly. Ghost stepped down off the table and returned to his corner. Several people in the room noticed that his tail was moving. The tribunal convened at 0900. Ryan sat at the table with his hands flat in front of him and his back straight, and he looked like someone who had decided to stop performing composure and was simply experiencing whatever was going to happen. Maya was brought in by wheelchair. She had not met the panel before. She looked at each of the 3 officers for a moment, the way she looked at everything. Not aggressively, but completely as if she was recording. She spoke without notes. Petty Officer Holt provided logistical information to a hostile network under the direct threat of physical harm to a family member. He delayed compliance for 3 weeks, distorted the information twice before giving accurate data, and surrendered voluntarily to his unit before any external investigation identified him. She paused. The night he surrendered, Director Callum's team was able to locate and protect his sister before the network could act on her. His disclosure directly prevented a second attack. The panel officer, said Instructor Reeves, "You were the primary person harmed by the information he provided." "Yes, and you're recommending leniency." "I'm recommending proportionality," she said. "He acted under coercion, not ideology. He caused harm he did not want to cause." He came forward before he was caught. She looked at the officers. If we punish people who break under the worst pressure of their lives, we are teaching every person in this building that confession is more dangerous than concealment. That is a lesson that will cost lives in the field. The lesson I would rather teach is that it is possible to do a wrong thing for a survivable reason, and to come back from it. That is the only lesson worth having in a program that trains people to operate in impossible situations. The panel deliberated. The outcome was supervised probation. Ryan would complete the program under close evaluation, his record reflecting the incident, alongside the mitigating factors and the voluntary disclosure. When the decision was read, Cole raised his hand. The unit's position is that Petty Officer Holt finishes the program with us. He looked around the room. All of us. 11 hands went up. Ryan Holt looked at 11 hands and said nothing for a moment. Then he looked at the floor, and his shoulders dropped in the specific way that happens when something that has been held at enormous muscular cost is finally slowly set down. After the tribunal, Maya found him in the corridor. Ghost was beside her. Ryan stood when he saw her coming. "Mom, don't," she said. Not harshly. "Don't thank me. That's not the transaction." She held his gaze. "The transaction is what you do with the next 20 years. That's where the accounting happens." Ghost walked forward and pressed his nose briefly against Ryan's hand. Ryan looked down at the dog for a moment. "How does he always know?" he said. Maya moved her wheelchair past him toward the exit. "He paid attention," she said, "from the very first day." The graduation ceremony at Fort Ridgeline was held on a Thursday morning in early October, when the desert had finally softened into something approximating autumn. The temperature in the low 80s, a wind moving across the yard that carried the smell of sage and distant rain. 12 operators stood in dress uniform in the same yard where 12 weeks earlier they had stood in formation and calculated in the first 3 seconds of looking at a woman and a dog that they already knew everything they needed to know. Maya sat at the front of the assembled group in her wheelchair, her dress uniform pressed and exact, Ghost beside her in a vest that read "retired," a distinction that had been formally conferred 2 weeks prior after the investigation concluded and the tribunal records were sealed. Director Callum was present, standing at the back of the assembly in civilian clothes, watching with the expression of someone who had been in this business long enough to recognize the difference between a conclusion and a continuation. Commander Aldrich presented the certifications. When Cole came forward, Aldrich shook his hand for a long moment before releasing it, which Cole understood to mean something that wouldn't be said aloud. Maya handed Cole his certificate without ceremony. He took it. He looked at her for a moment. There were things he had been composing and discarding for several days, arrangements of words that never quite held the weight he was trying to put into them. He said, "Thank you for not letting us stay who we were." Maya said, "Thank you for being worth the inconvenience." He laughed, an honest laugh, unguarded, the kind that doesn't plan itself. After the ceremony, Callum made a brief address. The Integrated Operator Program was being formally reinstated, a classified announcement made in a cleared room to a cleared audience. The methodology that had ended Maya's career as a covert operative, the belief that saving lives was more operationally viable than ending them, had been reviewed at the highest levels and validated. Maya was appointed senior advisor to the reconstituted program. She would not return to the field. She would shape the people who did. She would do it from Fort Ridgeline, in a modified facility, with a Belgian Malinois, with amber eyes sitting at her left side. After the room cleared, Cole found Maya in the empty assembly hall, looking at the certification in her hands, with an expression he had learned over 12 weeks to read as the external evidence of an internal conversation she wasn't ready to have out loud. "You okay?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "I've been fighting to justify existing in this building since the day I arrived," she said. "Fighting to prove I could still teach, still matter, still be worth the space I take up. She looked at him. Today feels different. Like maybe I'm not fighting anymore. Like maybe I'm just here. You were always here, Cole said. We just took 12 weeks to see it. She set the certificate down. Ghost had walked quietly to her side at some point during the exchange, as he always did, arriving without announcement present before he was noticed. She put her hand on his head. 3 months later, Cole received a package. Inside was a military ID tag, not Maya's. Older, worn at the edges, the name partly faded. A man Cole didn't recognize. There was a handwritten note in Maya's writing, on a single index card. He asked me to give this to whoever deserved it most. His name was Daniel Reyes. He was the third member of the Integrated Operator Program, the one Callum told you had retired and gone untraceable. He did not retire. He went looking for the person who sold my identity. He found them. It cost him everything. I spent 3 years trying to find who he would have wanted to have this. Ghost found you in 3 days. Keep it. He would have recognized what he saw. Monsieur Cole sat with the tag in his palm for a long time. Ghost was at his feet, not because anyone had brought him here, not because any protocol required it, but because Ghost had made a choice that dogs in training manuals are not supposed to be capable of making, and had made it with the same quiet certainty that had defined him from the first morning in the yard. Cole put the tag on the chain beside his own. Ghost lifted his head, looked at Cole for a moment, and then placed his chin back down on his paws and closed his eyes. Outside, Fort Ridgeline was beginning its morning cycle boots on pavement commands, crossing the yard. Another group of operators, who thought they already knew what strength looked like. Somewhere in the building behind them, a woman in a wheelchair was preparing to show them otherwise. And a retired dog with amber eyes and a closed case was, for the first time in 8 years, simply resting.